For centuries, the galaxy belonged to a single power, an empire so vast, so ruthless, that no one dared to challenge them. Their armies were unstoppable. Their fleets darkened the skies of every world they conquered. Entire civilizations had vanished beneath their iron rule, their histories erased, their people enslaved or exterminated. They were the Zelnari. To those who lived under their reign, they were not just rulers. They were the end of resistance, the end of hope. The Zelnari had built their empire on war, on strength, on absolute control. Every species that had ever tried to fight them had been crushed. Every rebellion had been put down with merciless efficiency. They were conquerors, and in their eyes, they always would be. No one could stand against them. No one had ever won. And so, the galaxy suffered in silence. Not because it wanted to, not because it lacked courage, but because history had shown, time and time again, that defiance only led to destruction. Then something changed. A new species emerged. They were small, insignificant, a primitive race from the far reaches of the galaxy, barely out of their home system. They had no great fleets, no legendary warriors, no ancient technologies. At least, that's what the Zelnari believed. Because for all their power, for all their conquests, for all their experience in war, the Zelnari had never fought humans, and they had no idea what was coming. This is just the beginning of the battle. Want more thrilling encounters and epic HFY moments? Subscribe now to HFY Aliens Battle and never miss a fight for humanity's survival. Hit the bell icon so you're always ready for the next battle. Now let's continue our story. The war that no one could win. The galaxy had seen many wars before. Rebellions, uprisings, desperate coalitions formed by those who believed they could resist the Zelnari. They had all failed. The problem wasn't just the Zelnari's military power. It was the inevitability of their victories. Most species fought wars in predictable ways. They built fleets, formed alliances, developed strategies. But no matter how clever their tactics were, no matter how advanced their weapons became, the result was always the same. The Zelnari adapted. They studied their enemies, dismantled their defenses, and wiped them from existence. One by one, civilizations had fallen. Some took longer than others, but in the end, all of them suffered the same fate. The galaxy had learned this lesson well. Resistance was suicide. So when whispers of a new rebellion began to spread, no one paid them any mind. A tiny species called humans had been discovered. Their technology was laughable compared to the Zelnari. Their ships were primitive, their colonies barely developed. They had no war fleets, no dreadnoughts, no ancient superweapons. It would be a short war, or at least, that was what the Zelnari believed. The first battle was supposed to be a massacre. A Zelnari war fleet descended upon a human colony world, expecting a quick victory. The standard process was simple: bomb the planetary defenses, land troops, eliminate any resistance, and take full control before the enemy even knew what had happened. But something was wrong. The humans didn't flee like the others had. They didn't panic. They didn't surrender. Instead, they fought. Not like the other species. Not with desperate, uncoordinated attacks. Not with predictable strategies that the Zelnari had countered 1,000 times before. The humans were different. They were fast. They were unpredictable. They refused to break. And for the first time in the history of the Zelnari Empire, they lost a battle. It was not a major defeat. The humans didn't have the strength to destroy an entire fleet. But they stopped the invasion. They held their ground. And that had never happened before. The Zelnari didn't know it yet, but something had shifted. They had expected an easy conquest. Instead, they had just started a war they would never be able to control. Because they weren't fighting another empire. They weren't fighting another species that followed the old rules of war. They were fighting humans. And humans had never known how to quit. The arrival of an unknown species. The Zelnari had fought countless wars, crushed countless rebellions. But this time, something was different. Their analysts studied the battle reports. The data didn't make sense. The human colony should have fallen within hours. The planetary defenses were primitive. Their ships were outdated. Their ground forces were outnumbered. And yet, They had won. The Council of Warlords convened in secrecy, debating what had gone wrong. One theory suggested it was a fluke, a lucky outcome. Perhaps the humans had prepared for an invasion earlier than expected. Maybe they had used guerrilla tactics that confused Zelnari battle doctrine. But then it happened again. Another human colony world was attacked. And once again, the humans refused to break. They weren't fighting like the other species. They weren't relying on numbers or raw firepower. They were fighting like they had nothing to lose. The Zelnari had always believed that war was about superiority, stronger weapons, bigger fleets, overwhelming force. But humans didn't fight wars that way. They fought dirty. They set traps. They used decoys. They sacrificed their own ships if it meant taking down an enemy capital vessel. They targeted supply lines, ambushed patrol fleets, and struck in places no Zelnari commander had ever expected an attack. Worse still, they learned. Every battle they fought, they adapted. If a tactic failed once, they never used it again. If something worked, they refined it until it was devastating. The Zelnari, who had spent thousands of years perfecting war, suddenly found themselves losing, not to a superior force, but to an enemy that was constantly changing. And for the first time in their empire's long history, they felt something new. Fear. This was not an ordinary species. This was not an ordinary war. The Zelnari had expected to fight soldiers. Instead, they were fighting survivors. And survivors didn't care about the odds. They only cared about winning. The Council of Warlords sent an order across the Empire. Crush humanity before they became a true threat. But what the Zelnari still didn't understand was that they had already made their biggest mistake. They had started a war with humans. And humans never stopped fighting. The first battle, something unbelievable happens. The Zelnari Empire launched a full-scale offensive. No more probing attacks. No more small skirmishes. This time, they sent their true war machine. A fleet of 200 Zelnari warships emerged from hyperspace, descending upon a human stronghold, Omega-3, a remote military station orbiting a barren moon. It was barely more than a fortress, armed with outdated weaponry and a handful of defense satellites. The outcome should have been obvious. The Zelnari sent their message: surrender or be annihilated. The humans responded, come and try. The Zelnari had heard defiance before. It meant nothing. So they advanced, their warships forming a perfect battle formation, shields raised, weapons primed. The station's defenses opened fire, plasma turrets, railguns, missile pods. The Zelnari scoffed. It was a pathetic resistance. Their fleet absorbed the attack without breaking formation. And then, the humans did something that no species had ever done before. They rammed their own ships into the enemy. Not because they had no choice. Not because they were desperate, but because they had planned it that way. The first wave of human corvettes, small, fragile ships compared to the Zelnari dreadnoughts, charged directly into enemy fire, dodging plasma blasts at impossible speeds. They wove between the Zelnari fleet like swarming insects, avoiding the heavy guns that had been designed for traditional, large-scale warfare. Then, at the exact moment of impact, they detonated their own engines. Massive explosions tore through the Zelnari formation, disrupting their shields, crippling their forward defenses. The Empire had never seen anything like it. To them, war was about strategy, power, precision. But the humans, it didn't just fight to win. They fought to break their enemy. The Zelnari fleet staggered. Before they could recover, the second human wave struck, frigates using debris as cover, launching missile swarms into the chaos. The Empire's perfect formations collapsed. And then, the third wave arrived. Heavy cruisers, dropping from orbit at high velocity, firing as they fell, striking the weakened fleet from above. For the first time in their history, the Zelnari were not winning. They were being outplayed. The humans fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. They were unpredictable. They were reckless. They were terrifying. And in a matter of hours, the unthinkable happened. The Zelnari fleet retreated. They ran, because the Empire had finally realized the truth. They were not fighting another desperate rebellion. They were not fighting another doomed civilization. They were fighting something else. Something far worse. They were fighting humans, and humans never played fair. The psychology of human warfare. The Zelnari could not understand what had happened. For centuries, war had been predictable. Strength decided victory. Superior technology, superior numbers, superior tactics. These were the rules of conquest. The Zelnari had mastered those rules. But the humans? They broke the rules. They didn't fight with overwhelming force. They fought with adaptation. They turned their weaknesses into strengths. They embraced chaos. For the first time, the Empire realized that they weren't facing an enemy that could be calculated. Their war analysts struggled to process the battle data. The humans should have lost Omega-3. They should have surrendered or been obliterated. But instead, they had done the unthinkable. They had sacrificed their own ships, not out of desperation, but as a deliberate tactic. They had used psychological warfare, striking fear into a species that had never known fear. They had learned from the Zelnari's every move, adapting faster than any other civilization ever had. And it wasn't just their tactics that were terrifying. It was their mindset. Most species fear death. Most avoided war unless they were forced into it. Even those that resisted the Zelnari often fought defensively, hoping to survive. But the humans? They sought war. Not because they wanted conquest, not because they wanted to rule, but because they refused to submit. Their history was filled with war, struggle, and survival. They had fought among themselves for thousands of years, perfecting battle strategies long before they even reached the stars. Their technology was not the most advanced in the galaxy, but their understanding of warfare itself was beyond anything the Zelnari had ever encountered. The Empire was beginning to see the truth. Humans didn't fight like the others because humans were not like the others. They didn't just resist. They pushed back. They didn't just fight wars. They evolved through them. They didn't fear annihilation. They turned it into a weapon. And worst of all, they were getting better with every battle. The Zelnari had never faced an enemy like this before. And now, they had a terrifying question to answer. Could they even win this war? Because if humanity kept learning, kept adapting, kept fighting, then for the first time in the history of the Empire, the Zelnari might not be the strongest species in the galaxy anymore. Turning the tide, humanity strikes back. The Zelnari had ruled the galaxy for centuries. Their victories had been absolute, their dominance unquestioned. But that was before they made a mistake, before they declared war on humans, before they realized that the rules of war had changed. At first, they had believed that humanity's victories were nothing more than anomalies, that these strange creatures were simply lucky, that with enough firepower, enough coordination, enough brutality, the war would end the way all wars had before, with the Zelnari standing victorious. But as the war dragged on, the pattern became clear. The humans were winning. Not all at once, not in a way that made sense, but slowly, battle by battle, system by system, they were pushing back. The changing war. The Zelnari Empire had never been forced into a long war before. They had always won within months, sometimes even weeks. Their enemies never lasted long enough to be considered a real threat. But now, the war with humanity was stretching into years. It was taking a toll. The Zelnari's war strategies, once flawless, were starting to show cracks. Their ships, designed for overwhelming force, were being outmaneuvered. Their troops, trained for precise, calculated strikes, were being drawn into unpredictable, chaotic battles. Their supply lines, once unbreakable, were being cut apart by human raiding fleets. They couldn't keep up, because every battle was different. One day, the humans fought with traditional formations, luring the Zelnari into a false sense of security. The next, they abandoned all strategy and launched full-scale planetary assaults, ignoring conventional tactics and winning anyway. They fought with deception, with misdirection, with relentless, unshakable will. And for the first time in Zelnari history, their enemies were surviving. The spark of rebellion. But it wasn't just the war that was changing. The entire galaxy was watching. For centuries, the Zelnari had crushed every rebellion before it could spread. They had built their empire on fear, the knowledge that no species could resist them and live. But now, humanity had proven them wrong, and that single fact was more dangerous than any fleet, any weapon, any battle. The moment the first Zelnari war fleet retreated from a human victory, something shifted across the galaxy. The other species, the ones who had lived under Zelnari rule for generations, saw what was happening. They saw the Empire bleed. They saw the impossible become possible. They saw hope. And hope was the most dangerous thing the Zelnari had ever faced. Rebellions began to stir. Quiet at first, whispers in the shadows, hidden movements on occupied worlds. But soon it became something more. First, a Zelnari supply station was sabotaged, not by humans, but by an enslaved species that had been watching from the sidelines. Then, an entire Zelnari-controlled planet rose up in defiance, armed with weapons that had been smuggled in by human hands. And before the Empire could react, before they could crush this rising defiance, the flames had spread everywhere. The Zelnari had never faced an opponent like humanity before, not because of their technology, not because of their tactics, but because of their ability to inspire, to take the idea of freedom, of resistance, of defiance, and turn it into something unstoppable. The Zelnari had believed themselves to be untouchable, unbeatable, the ultimate rulers of the galaxy. But now, they were realizing the truth. They had not just started a war against humans. They had started a war against the entire galaxy. And for the first time, they were losing. The fall of the invincible empire. The war had changed. The Zelnari had always believed in their absolute superiority. Their fleets were larger. Their technology was more advanced. Their control over the galaxy had been unchallenged for centuries. But now, something unthinkable was happening. Their fleets were being outmaneuvered. Their supply lines were collapsing. Their occupied worlds were rising against them. They had spent too long believing that they were invincible. And now, they were learning the cost of arrogance. The desperation of the Zelnari. At first, the Zelnari leaders refused to believe the truth. They doubled their war efforts. They deployed more fleets. They increased their firepower. They turned to brutality, destroying entire planets in an attempt to send a message to the rebels. But the message they sent was not fear. It was rage. Every act of destruction, every atrocity, every desperate attempt to crush humanity and the growing rebellion only fueled the fire. The Empire had believed that they could terrorize the galaxy back into submission. But instead, they had united the galaxy against them. The turning point. The final blow came when the Zelnari tried to eliminate Earth itself. With their forces stretched thin, they gambled everything on one last desperate strike. A massive fleet, larger than anything ever assembled, was sent straight for humanity's homeworld. They thought it would end the war. They thought that, if they could just burn Earth, the resistance would fall apart. They were wrong. The humans knew the attack was coming, and they were ready. They didn't face the Zelnari fleet alone. Every species that had once cowered under the Empire's rule had sent their own ships to fight alongside humanity. The final battle wasn't just a war between the Zelnari and humans. It was a galactic reckoning. For the first time in history, the galaxy stood united, not under fear, not under tyranny, but under defiance. The end of the Empire. The battle over Earth was the bloodiest in galactic history. But when the smoke cleared, the Zelnari were broken. Their fleets shattered. Their war machine crippled. Their empire dying. The surviving Zelnari warlords tried to retreat, tried to flee to the last strongholds of their once great empire. But there was nowhere left to run. One by one, their worlds fell. Their former slaves turned against them. The species they had once ruled now hunted them down. The invincible empire, the one that had ruled the galaxy for centuries, the one that no one had ever dared to challenge, was no more. The Zelnari had lost, not just a war. They had lost everything. And at the center of it all, the force that had toppled the greatest power the galaxy had ever known was humanity, a new galactic order. The Zelnari Empire was no more. Their fleets had been destroyed. Their strongholds had been conquered. Their leaders had been hunted down and captured. For the first time in thousands of years, the galaxy was free. But with the fall of Zelnari came a new question. What happens next? The aftermath of war. Every species that had fought against the Empire now faced a new reality. For generations, they had lived under Zelnari rule. Their civilizations had been shaped by fear, their cultures stripped away, their histories erased, their worlds ruled with an iron fist. Now that rule was gone, and in its place, there was uncertainty. Who would lead? Who would rebuild? Would there be peace? Or would another power rise to take the Zelnari's place? The galaxy had never known freedom before, and for many, freedom was terrifying. Humanity's role in the new order. Many had expected the humans to take control. After all, they had led the war. They had fought harder than anyone else. They had been the ones to bring the Empire to its knees. And yet, they did not claim power. They did not seek to rule the galaxy. They did something unthinkable. They offered the galaxy a choice. Instead of establishing a new empire, they proposed a council, a coalition of free species, where no one ruler would dictate the future. A new alliance, built not on fear, but on cooperation. It was an idea that no one had ever considered before. For centuries, the galaxy had only known tyranny. And yet, here were the humans, offering something different. A chance for peace. A chance for something better. The galaxy's reaction. At first, there was hesitation. The scars of war ran deep. Many feared that another empire, another ruler, would simply rise in the Zelnari's place. But then, one by one, the species of the galaxy began to listen. They had seen what humanity was capable of. They had witnessed their strength, their cunning, their unbreakable spirit. But most of all, they had seen their mercy. In the end, the galaxy chose to follow humanity's lead, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as allies. The fate of the Zelnari. And what of the Zelnari? Some had been captured. Others had gone into hiding. But they were no longer an empire. They were a broken species, scattered and leaderless. Some believed they would one day rise again, that they would seek revenge, that the war was not truly over. But if that day ever came, the galaxy would be ready, because thanks to humanity, the galaxy was no longer afraid. And for the first time in history, the galaxy belonged to all. The future, what comes next? The war was over. The Zelnari, once the undisputed rulers of the galaxy, had been defeated. Their empire, once thought unstoppable, was nothing but ruins and fading memories. But as the fires of war cooled, a new question arose. What comes next? The galaxy after the war. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy was without a master. For centuries, the Zelnari had dictated every law, every movement, every future. Now, with them gone, every species had to decide their own fate. Some flourished, reclaiming lost worlds, rebuilding their civilizations in ways they had never been allowed before. Others struggled, uncertain how to exist without the rule of the empire, without the structure that had, for better or worse, defined their existence. And though the war had been won, the scars it left behind would never fully fade. The humans' next move. The rest of the galaxy had expected humanity to claim the throne, to seize power, to take their place as the new rulers of the stars. After all, no one could deny the truth. Humanity had earned it. But instead of conquest, humanity did something unexpected. They stepped back. They did not demand tribute. They did not impose laws. Instead, they worked alongside the other species, helping to rebuild, guiding without controlling, teaching without ruling. They did not seek to replace the Zelnari. They sought to break the cycle forever. And that was what truly terrified the remaining warlords of the old world. Because humans didn't just fight wars. They changed the rules of war itself. The final warning. But even as peace settled, there were whispers. The last remnants of the Zelnari, scattered and hiding, still plotted in the darkness. Other species, watching humanity from afar, wondered what would happen if they ever turned their strength toward conquest. Because one thing had become clear to all. Humanity was not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the most advanced. But there was something far, far more dangerous. They were unpredictable. They were relentless. And now, they were everywhere. Watching, learning, preparing. Because if the day ever came when a new enemy rose from the void, if something worse than the Zelnari ever threatened the galaxy again, then humanity would be ready. And this time, they wouldn't be fighting alone. Because, thanks to them, the galaxy had changed forever, and no one would ever be able to stand against them again.